So today's reading is taken from 1 Kings 17, verses 8 to 16, and as is my usual habit, I shall be reading from the Message. So then God spoke to Elijah, "Get up and go to Zarephath in Sidon and live there. I've instructed a woman who lives there, a widow, to feed you." So he got up and went to Zarephath. As he came to the entrance of the village, he met a woman, a widow, gathering firewood. He asked her, "Please, would you bring me a little water in a jug? I need a drink." As she went to get it, he called out, "And while you're at it, would you bring me something to eat?" She said, "I swear, as surely as your God lives, I don't have so much as a biscuit. I have a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a bottle. You found me scratching together just enough firewood to make a last meal for my son and me. After we eat it, we'll die." Elijah said to her, "Don't worry about a thing. Go ahead and do what you've said, but first make a small biscuit for me and bring it back here. Then go ahead and make a meal from what's left for you and your son. This is the word of God, of the God of Israel. The jar of flour will not run out, and the bottle of oil will not become empty before God sends rain on the land and ends this drought." As she went right off and did just as Elijah had asked. And it turned out as he said, daily food for her and her family. The jar of meal didn't run out, and the bottle of oil didn't become empty. God's promise fulfilled to the letter, exactly as Elijah had delivered it.
So, good morning. Didn't say that at the beginning, did I? Good morning. It feels like winter has started, doesn't it? Everybody's huddling together at the back. Am I cold or something? Yeah, anyway, the welcome of God. We're thinking about hospitality over the next few weeks. I'll do a few other things on Pentecost Sunday and possibly the Sunday after. But we're thinking about in and around hospitality and what that looks like. We had a bit of a look at that last week. We're talking about Martha and Mary and talking about how God uses hospitality to cause us to confront some challenging questions. And it caused certainly Martha to face some of those questions. Scripture says this, "Welcome one another, therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God." And how does God welcome us? Well, he welcomes us extravagantly. He gave of his best, as it were, his own dearly beloved Son. And therefore, out of God's welcome to us, we are called to welcome, to provide hospitality, to open our lives to others. And we talked about hospitality as literally in Greek, the love of strangers or aliens or passers-by or people we barely know. And so we're thinking today about welcoming. At some point, Seepage Mill Church decided to quit playing the numbers game. "Oh, you're newcomers. Our strangers and aliens class meets downstairs in the boiler room. You can be sure of a warm welcome at Seepage Mill Church." Or this one, "They sure have a funny way of greeting first-time visitors around here." Yeah. So, the welcome of God. This story about Elijah and the widow is, of course, a well-known story in the Old Testament. And I want to talk about this story and then think about some of the objections we have to welcoming people at various times. And I include myself in this message as well. Becoming a hospitable person. In 1 Kings 17, we encounter a powerful lesson here about hospitality. The prophet Elijah has been experiencing God's testing and God's provision. He's been sustained by a brook, but then the brook dries up. And God directs him to a place called Zarephath. And that means a smelting place. And it becomes the backdrop for an essential part of Elijah's life as his ministry moves forward and his outreach to the community and his ministry within the community of Israel and beyond. And upon arriving there, Elijah encounters this widow who is gathering sticks to make a fire. She is an unlikely source of hospitality. There is no Centrelink. This widow's on her own, it seems. There's no support around her. She's about to face her last meal with her son, and they're both staring death in the face. And she is so short on food, she's just really just got enough for her and her son. And despite her own desperate circumstances, she responds to Elijah's request for water and a bit of bread. I don't know why. I don't think the text particularly tells us why. But hospitality is a very high standard in the Middle East, even if you've got virtually nothing. And despite her own desperate circumstances, she responds to Elijah's request for water and bread. And here is his hospitality amid scarcity in the midst of all this. The widow's generosity is remarkable because she shares her meager resources with Elijah. She provides him with food, even though she's facing starvation, and has a child as well to look after. I remember being hosted by a family in a slum in Pune in India, and I was just blown away by their generosity. It was, literally pieces of corrugated iron put together and boards at the side. That was their home. Just getting a little bit of ringing in my ears, and I don't think it's my tinnitus. So I might just want to turn down the sound a bit. And here is this woman. She has an act of faith that demonstrates that hospitality is not limited to abundance. It can thrive even in scarcity. Her oil jar, in the end, doesn't run out. It's a miracle. It's not something that's repeatable. It's not something that you can analyze through scientific measures. It's just simply a miracle. And this story challenges our self-centered tendencies. Our society often prioritizes personal gain and well-being above all else, me and mine. However, the widow gives us an example of that even in her pain, even in her need, we can actually think of others. And God may want to use us in that way, even in our own brokenness, in our own vulnerabilities. And Christ-likeness means considering the needs of others, even in the midst of trials. And that's hard sometimes, isn't it? Elijah has need, and it becomes an opportunity to minister to the widow and her son. Now, if you read on in this story, you discover that the widow's son, am I still coming through on this, or should I try it? Yeah, okay. The widow's son dies in the story. So, it's all going great. There's provision and God's good and all starting to be right with the world, and then the widow's son dies. That's a bit of a twist. But in turn is an opportunity for God through Elijah. As so often happens, we do a good thing, God blesses it, and then it goes belly up. Right? And that's, again, a Greek term, which I may want to try and translate at some point. Belly uppus, it's there. It's in the text of Hezekiah chapter 1, verse 2. Okay. But as is so often in the case of meals in the Bible, the roles of host and hosted flip around. This happens again and again throughout Scripture. Jesus at meals is being hosted, and then you discover he's become the host, right? And we think of those words, the welcoming of God, that we just read just a few moments ago. The welcome of God. The welcome of God for us. Host, hosted. And whenever there are meals, those we host bring something with them too, even if they forget to bring the dessert or the drink with them. I love this widow. It's a massive risk of faith. But maybe she was hearing God. Her trials hadn't stopped her serving and extending compassion. She recognizes that the God of Elijah is the living God. It says it in the text. So maybe she does have a faith there. Our suffering or need doesn't isolate us. It connects us to others who also needs God's love and provision. And this passage teaches us that hospitality can transcend circumstances, can transcend our wallets, can transcend our gaps in what we feel we have to give. Because our hospitality can be about compassion and love and the welcome of others. One beautiful Sunday morning, a minister announced to his congregation, "My good people, I have here in my hands 3 sermons. A $1,000 sermon that lasts 5 minutes, a $500 sermon that lasts 15 minutes, and a $100 sermon that lasts a full hour. Now we'll take the collection and see which one I'll deliver." All right. That was just an interjection in the midst of talking about this, and welcome. Being generous, something tenuous connection, and I just thought I'd share the story. Simple message today is simply this, and if you don't remember anything else, welcome different people into your life. Remember that. Be a person that models the welcome of Jesus. Historically, hospitality and care for strangers was one of the main reasons the church grew during the 2nd to 4th centuries. Now, this is really, really mind-blowing when you actually understand some of the history of the church in the pre-Christendom era of the church from 4th century onwards. If you understand the history, we tend to read church history through the lens of the book of Acts, which is primarily focused on a few individuals who were apostles. We do not have a single command from church leaders for 300 years to go and evangelize. 300 years. There is one small comment in one letter of one church leader which may be interpreted that way. There is not a single command to go and evangelize. Let that sink in for a couple of minutes. I can give you the research if you like. Talk to me afterwards. What they did have, again and again, we got multiple letters from church leaders throughout those centuries, was the call on God's people to welcome strangers into their homes, to welcome and be loving, demonstrate a life of grace and hospitality and openness and kindness and goodness, and live your life in the public realm as the people of God. Let it leak out of you, in other words. Find a stranger, take them in. We've got a number of documents that all say very similar things in that way. 1 Peter 4 verse 9, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Or again, this just echoes the Old Testament. Do not mistreat an alien or oppress him, for you were aliens in Egypt, God says to Israel. Don't treat the foreigner in your midst like you were treated in Egypt. I have rescued you. Love for a stranger, for someone who's a different tribe to you, a different people to you, though difficult and even dangerous, is a biblical expectation. In our story, Elijah is in enemy territory and discovers that despite that, a desperate widow is God's means of provision. And the widow, she acts good host and finds that the empty-handed man of God actually brings with him provision. And yet in the Western world, we've lost sight at times of the importance of welcoming strangers. And we put up so many arguments against it. Firstly, we say it's too dangerous. We live in a culture and a climate of suspicion at times. We grew up with Hansel and Gretel. Never trust strangers is the moral of Hansel and Gretel. Particularly old ladies with enticing lollies. I always eyed my grandmother with a jaundiced look when she offered me a gingerbread man, I'll tell you. We don't know who the stranger is or what he or she may be like. Keep your guard up. Be careful who you let near your children. It may be the mad bad axeman at the door. Don't pick up the hitchhiker. You may get mugged. The neighbor may be of a different skin tone or language or religion, so watch out. Get your sticker on your fridge about terrorism. Be alert. Don't be alarmed. In America in the year 2000, in April 2000, Ricky and Tony Sexton were taken hostage inside their home in Virginia by a fugitive couple on a crime spree. Ricky and Tony Sexton were taken prisoner. Tony had taken her dog outside when Dennis Lewis and Angela Tanner roared into her driveway, pointed pistols at her, and yelled at her to get back inside the house. And inside the house, the Sextons turned their hostage experience into an opportunity to demonstrate love. Wow. They listened to their captors' troubles, fed them, showed them gospel videos, would you believe? Read to them from the Bible and prayed, cried with them. And meantime, the police were all gathered around outside the SWAT squad, etc. The Sextons even refused their own release when Lewis and Tanner suggested that they might end the standoff by committing suicide. The standoff had an unusual ending. It went like this. Before surrendering to the police, Angela Tanner gave the Sextons $135 and a note. And the note read like this: "Thank you for your hospitality. We really appreciate it. Wishing you all luck and love. Please accept this. It is really all we have to offer. Love, Angela and Dennis." And they were carted off to prison. Followers of Jesus should never forget the disarming power of Christian love. Opening ourselves up to love is risky and dangerous. Not often that dangerous. But it is our calling. The story of the widow in Elijah is of a woman on her own who risks all for a stranger from another tribe, another people. There were no police in those days, but she allows an unknown man to be part of her family. It's risky, and the rewards are great. But what about when disaster occurs as a result of opening the door? What about when you decide to be open to strangers, you get robbed or something happens? Now look, the question of suffering this side of heaven can never be fully answered. No amount of simplistic, I'm trying to discern the meaning in all of this, always work. Doesn't always work. Came across this story though recently. Suzanne lost her father, who was a pastor, to men that came into their house. They also tried but failed to kill her. Her father was a rejecter of the death penalty, and Sue went to court and fought to save her father's and her would-be murderer from the death penalty. And after some years, eventually she succeeded. The sentence was commuted to life. She opened her door and lost her father and nearly her own life, but she found God's redemption, forgiveness, and grace beyond it, and her story spread like wildfire. Or again, more recently, here in this country, the Orthodox bishop who had been stabbed recently, maybe you saw the news, and forgave his attacker almost right away. Now, of course, many sufferings don't have any apparent redemptive qualities. We're called to walk with faith towards a future redemption. But let's be aware that we must not give in to fear to stop us opening up ourselves to others. And maybe God bringing us something through our reaching out to them. And maybe something of our own wholeness is actually held in the hands of the person we welcome. Be a person that models the welcome of Jesus. Some people say, well, I'm just too busy. And you know, there's a truth there. Life is busy enough without adding to the demands of visitors to our list of things to do. Somebody once said this: in an era when many of us feel that time is our scarcest resource, hospitality falters. In a fast food culture, a wise Benedictine monk observes this: you have to remind yourself that some things cannot be done quickly. Hospitality. Do you get the message? The same as what I was saying a couple of weeks ago about quietness and solitude. That is a price to weigh and measure. However, we may miss something if we're too calculating. Another little story: an old couple came to a hotel at 11 p.m. The sign outside said full. It was a rainy night. They asked for a room. It's 11 o'clock at night. If you're that night clerk, you could say, you're crazy, it's raining outside, it's 11 o'clock at night, got no reservation, why are you bothering me? I can't help you, we're filled up. Instead, the night clerk said this, we don't have any good rooms, they're all gone. But I tell you what, I have a room here, it's not much, but I'll have Mary, the night housekeeper, clean it up, put some flowers in there. Wait here for a few moments. I'm sure she'll be comfortable for the night. I'm sure you'll be comfortable for the night. I hate to send you out on a horrible rainy night like this. Mary came back and said, this room is clean. And the clerk said, now you two can go upstairs and I'll have some hot tea sent up for you. Now, that's one way to handle interruptions, isn't it? Unreasonable interruptions late at night. Strange thing about that story is that a year and a half later, when the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York was built and finished, John Astor, who was the man with his wife, came and had come to the hotel that night, said this, I want that night clerk to manage my hotel. You never know when your enemy might bless you, even if it's an interrupter. The widow in the Bible story could have said that she had her meal plans worked out. Okay, there was only one. Her final meal plan. And she had nothing to spare, but she let the man share her food. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13, verse 2. They may not look like angels. They may not have a halo. They may not have a 50-foot wingspan. They may not be dressed in white and come in floating on a cloud. They may look anything but angelic. But who knows? Welcome to our church, even though you're sitting in our family pew. Okay. One more argument against hospitality. Sometimes the question, gets asked, what about the effects on the kids if we spend time with others? It'd be too disruptive to our family life. And we've all heard about the pastor's kids who felt their dad was always on the phone helping parishioners but never had time for them. And of course that can be a danger. Husband and wife who frequently open their home for short and long-term hospitality that I knew of and housed children of missionaries, as well as people released from psychiatric hospitals. One man stayed with them for nearly 2 years, and the husband admitted this. It has caused certain difficulties, as you can imagine, but there's also tremendous joy in it. And they were asked the question, what's the effect on your 4 kids? Do they feel neglected or put out? And their oldest daughter said this, I think I've learned a lot from the people who have lived with us. I think I've learned love and acceptance and care. I can remember one time when my brother and I were little, it was late at night, and we heard this pounding on the door, and we went to the top of the steps. There was a woman there, and tears were just running down her face. As we were sitting at the top of the stairs, I saw Mom open the door and let this woman in. She put her arms around her. I guess this woman's husband had just left her, and she was hysterical. And as a child, she says, I saw Christ's love. I think I've learned through Mom and Dad just to love, accept, and care for people. Now, you've got to have boundaries. You absolutely, as a family, as a community, you have to have boundaries. Of course you do. But I would want to go against the culture that says a family is mum, dad, and X amount of kids. Kingdom of God values says that we are part of the community around us. We are part of the wider human community. Says that we are together for the sake of others, not just ourselves. The nuclear family is a very modern invention. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher said this, society, no such thing. Of course, she came from the right of politics and was very committed to the individual, asserting himself, etc., etc. All about individualism. No, it's not. We march to a different beat. We are called to rearrange our lives to keep in step with the Spirit, to the beat of loving welcome of strangers. That is the inheritance we got from the Jewish Torah. right the way through the ministry of Jesus into the early church. Now, I have to give introverts a bit of an out. I'm marginally more introvert than I am an extrovert, would you believe? Introverts can talk to large crowds. They're less easy with small groups, but most people have a chunk of introvert in them. And it's okay to hide in your cave after being with lots of people. You've no idea. Sunday lunchtime for me, Sue knows not to talk to me for at least an hour, sort of thing. Right? And maybe as an introvert, you don't want to be wearing a T-shirt that says, "I'd rather be somewhere else," but, all of us can learn to be present to the person in front of us. I've got to show you this meme. I love this. This is planning for introverts on their way to church, preparing to turn and greet my neighbor, then the next 2 hours recovering from turning and greeting my neighbor. Let me say again, hospitality is not about food, it is about an attitude of life. It's an attitude towards others, about having people around for a meal, maybe, but being hospitable to the checkout dude or girl that you walk past in Coles or Woolies or wherever. It's about nurturing openness, whatever your personality type. And we'll talk about that in the coming week or two. And it's a little bit disruptive, I looked at the definition of disruptive, and it means to shake things up and make your mark on the world. I like that. So what do we do? Simply this: see the stranger through the eyes of Jesus and look for Jesus in the eyes of the stranger. It's more than an action or even a state of mind. It is a way of looking at the world. Choose to reject suspicion as the first reaction to a stranger. Fear and hostility will not mark my life. I will not lock myself away. When you open up towards others, expect surprises. In unexpected ways, we may gain things from those whom we give hospitality to. Don't be like Martha, frustrated in her efforts, but lost sight of what it meant to be hospitable in the midst of food. Choose to let go of control like Mary did, as we looked at last week. I think of people in my own life. I'll change the names. I think of Mark, a man who was prone to psychotic episodes, who stayed with us early on in our marriage. The laughs we had and the things God taught us through him were numerous. Or again, a lady in Seoul who lived with us. She was going through a hard time, but gave us so much more than we gave her, both of her resources and her love right to this day. But when she came, I have to admit, I thought of how draining this might become, and how at times, yes, it was. And so there are times when I've given reluctantly, but despite that, God used that in another person's life and taught me that God is bigger than my stony heart. God is no man's debtor when it comes to hospitality. Somebody said this: in true hospitality, the roles of the host and the guest always blend in such a way that they become indistinguishable. The hostess receives far more than she ever gives. In some mysterious way, the guest provides for the host. We might not see what they provide at first, but gifts they bring, yes, they do. They do. And that happens all the time with Jesus, of course. Now, we talk about the idea of sowing and reaping sometimes in Christian circles. It's an idea of you give something, you get something back. It's almost inherited, kind of interpreted through a lens of Eastern religions into and read back into certain texts in the Bible. Give hospitably and you'll reap a reward. Maybe, I think it has a truth within it. But I suspect that sometimes the reaping doesn't come via the person we're hosting. And sometimes not even in this life. But it will come. Jesus said, when you did it to the least of these, you did it for me. In a parable possibly about the end of time. But we don't hear that till the end of the age when he returns. So become hospitable in the way you look out on the world. Look out with openness to others. Be open to encountering the Lord through others. We'll talk more about this next time. Of course, some people are more shy and reserved than others. That's okay. But let's nurture openness and care. Let's take risks to ask people, how are you doing? On a Sunday morning, how are you doing? Fancy grabbing a coffee this week? Let me cook for you. How about we go and grab a cake together? Might be a little bit much for you to do if you're very, very introverted. That's okay. But just try and look people in the eye if you can and ask them about their lives. Singer John Charles Thomas, at the age of 66, wrote this: I'm presently completing the second year of a 3-year survey on the hospitality or lack of it in churches. To date, of the 195 churches I have visited, I was spoken to in only one by someone other than an official greeter, and that was to ask me to move my feet. Ouch! So the call is this: be a person that models the welcome of Jesus. I don't know if he had particularly large feet, I might be forgiven for that, but that's not good. Let's not be those who expect the world to come to us. Reach out. Join a home group if you're not in one. If you're in one, invite someone to join. Invite someone for coffee. This isn't rocket science. Church should be community. That requires doing something about it. Don't come to church just to receive, but to give to others. Don't leave church in a hurry, or else you'll miss out on an aspect of what it means to be the people of God. Linger. See if Christ speaks to you through not only the service, but also the people of God. Come up for prayer afterwards if you'd like that. And there's always someone who will be willing to pray with you there. And just as God has extended a warm and embracing welcome to us, just as the widow extended a warm and embracing welcome to Elijah, may we be a people whom God gives us a willing heart to open up our lives to others. And then maybe we'll be like this cartoon next Sunday. Sunday, 9:30 a.m., the elite visitor awareness commandos go into action. Who's doing the manicure next week? Let's pray.